At Woodmere, we think of our exhibitions as opportunities to tell the stories of Philadelphia's artists. And one of our greatest stars in the history of art of Philadelphia is Violet Oakley. It was difficult to conceive of an exhibition that properly gave a sense of what makes this artist so amazing. And this was in large part because her greatest series of works, her biggest project, the great achievement of her career, is a series of murals that she made for the Pennsylvania State Capitol in Harrisburg. This was a commission that was very prestigious. It occupied Oakley from the first decade of the 20th century to the late 1920s. And these are things that can never move. For that reason, we had to think of ways to give a sense of what these murals mean here in our exhibition. We're very grateful to the Capitol Preservation Committee for giving us access to the murals and allowing us to make photography and video. And we've assembled as many preparatory sketches as we could that give a sense of the development of individual figures and elements in the overall scheme of the murals.
The Pennsylvania State Capitol is one of the grandest projects of the American Renaissance, a movement in American art that took place in the late 19th century and early 20th centuries. And it looked back to the Italian Renaissance, a time when architecture, design, and applied arts came together and created an experience that reflected a humanist way of life. Joseph Houston was the architect of the Capitol. He commissioned Oakley to create a series of mural panels for the governor's reception room, a very prominent and important room in the Capitol building. And Oakley at this time was in her late 20s. She was an established illustrator, but she had just begun her career as a muralist.
Houston suggested that the murals should celebrate, panel by panel, the diverse religious groups of Pennsylvania. Oakley, however, convinced him that she should be allowed to show how Pennsylvania became a place of diverse religious groups. The murals that are set in the years of the Protestant Reformation in England are complemented by those on the opposite wall that narrate the life of William Penn, from his initial inspiration to join the Quaker sect to his departure for the New World, preparing to found a state based on ideas of religious freedom. So, for example, the strength with which Anne Askew stood by her beliefs and chose to burn at the stake rather than recant complements the scene opposite, in which William Penn stands firm against the temptation to abandon his newfound Quakerism and settle back into the life of privilege to which he was born.
His friend, who is with him in red, has his hand on his shoulder and is endeavoring to turn him away from listening to Thomas Lowe preaching the Quaker ideas under the trees. And in this figure of the Cavalier in red, I said I made him as beautiful as I possibly could. And he represents the world, the flesh, and the devil. And he's very beautiful. So beware.
This is when his father has come up with this solution to basically ship him off far away where he can't embarrass the family any longer. And he is shown here holding on to the hand of this Quaker woman and pointing in the direction of the ships that they're going to go off. And you see a woman there in white, a nun, various other groups. So the people who are rejected because they don't fit into the Anglican religion he's inviting them to come. And that was what Penn did as well. He didn't establish Pennsylvania as a place for Quakers, but as a place for anyone who believed in religion.
Well, and it was so interesting to hear Violet Oakley again talking about this idea of Pennsylvania as a place of religious tolerance, because, and she says very clearly that I'm not talking about people who don't believe in God. It's essential for her that people embrace this idea of God. But how you find God, she says, is up to you. You know, that any person's path to get there is valid. And that's the story that she's putting on William Penn's shoulders.
So Pennsylvania was a much more diverse colony with regard to religion than most of the British colonies, like the Massachusetts Bay Colony, which was entirely Puritan and which didn't really tolerate people of other religious beliefs. And since people's religions were very often tied to their ethnicity, you didn't have a lot of cultural variety in a place like Massachusetts either. But the idea of religious tolerance becomes, of course, one of the cornerstones of the Bill of Rights. And because of that, Violet Oakley felt Pennsylvania had made great contributions to the foundation of the United States that she wanted to emphasize.
The next part of the story involves Oakley's work in the Senate chamber. This was a space that was originally given to Edwin Austin Abbey, a Philadelphia-born artist who spent most of his career in England. He had planned his mural designs and mural cycle around the interior decoration of the Senate chamber, which includes green walls, opulent gold decoration, and large chandeliers. When Edwin Austin Abbey suddenly died, it was a testament to Violet Oakley's skills as an artist that everyone turned to her and felt as though she should be the one to continue his work and complete the murals in the Senate chamber.
It's important to remember that Violet Oakley was born in 1874 in the aftermath of the Civil War, in the Reconstruction period. In her view, the Founding Fathers had made some grave errors. In the Constitutional Convention in 1787, the subject had been raised as to whether the country should not have slavery. And the convention did not come to that conclusion.
This is an interesting scene here of the Constitutional Convention. And here are the Founding Fathers. You can see Benjamin Franklin's very recognizable there, and there's Alexander Hamilton, who, as you know, eventually got his own Broadway show.
Yeah.
And there's George Washington. She had a model of his chair made so she could use it in her studio.
She describes how people mistake this scene for the signing of the Declaration of Independence, and she says, no, this is constructive. This is creating the idea of the nation. And she shows George Washington inspired.
Yes.
Right? I mean, he's that gesture. He's reaching up.
And it's the moment when he says, let us raise a standard to which the wise and honest can repair. The event is in the hand of God. But again, the most interesting thing about this, the most unusual, is that she shows an enslaved African working as a servant in the room. And what is he doing? He's carrying books. This, using books in the imagery, will run through Oakley's imagery.
And it's as if he's putting the books down over the lintel of the door. I mean, it's an amazing example of Violet Oakley working with the architecture of the space and making the murals continuous in the space. So it's almost an illusion as if you are there at the Constitutional Convention, the books are being put down, and you can't not notice that there is an enslaved African right at eye level. I mean, it's almost the first thing that you see that enters into your space.
That's interesting that you picked up that she's designed that for the viewer, because within the scene, not a single person is looking at the enslaved African. He's invisible as a servant. They're busy trying to create freedom and justice in an independent country, and here they're missing this obvious flaw in their social organization and in their founding documents that all men are created equal. So it's an indictment, in a way, of the founding fathers for ignoring this or thinking it was a problem that they could wait to deal with until later. And again, no one included this kind of subject matter.
For Oakley, the Civil War stems directly from that failure at the Constitutional Convention. And so in her murals, she juxtaposes General Washington, who creates the country in the American Revolution, with General Meade, who preserves the Union in the Civil War. She juxtaposes President Washington at the Constitutional Convention with President Lincoln at Gettysburg, presiding over mothers who have lost their children, soldiers who are crippled and maimed. For Violet Oakley, the Civil War is a direct outgrowth of the failure of the Founding Fathers to abolish slavery.
The First World War broke out when Oakley was in the middle of her work in the Senate chamber. Oakley's answer to warfare is the international coming together and cooperation of nations. In the uppermost panel, she shows a history of warfare that culminates in the battleships of World War I. The largest figure in the panel is a soldier from the War of 1812. He turns his sword inward in a refusal to fight. A history of enslavement and subjugation is at right. Oakley's great, majestic, allegorical figure of unity presides over kings who lay their crowns at her feet, and the races of the earth and prostitutes are freed from the bondage of slavery.
The great figure in the center symbolizes the water of life, the water that issues from the throne. And it symbolizes the unity of all things. It is painted entirely in blue. Blue is symbolic of the wisdom.
Violet Oakley provided a third and final series of murals to the Pennsylvania State Capitol. And this is the chamber for the activities of the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. It was now the 1920s. Violet Oakley's style has changed somewhat, become more modern, become more stylized in a way that might remind us of the Art Deco movement. Her series of murals are the unfolding of a book that tell the story of the history of law, from ancient times to contemporary times. Violet has lived through the horrors of the First World War, and she sees law, and specifically rule of law internationally, as the antidote to international warfare. And that's what we see unfolding in the Supreme Court chambers.
Oakley includes herself among a group of great thinkers, including Dante and Thomas More, whose philosophies informed the law. She also includes her life partner, Edith, as a student of the law at Oxford University.
And then next is the Sermon on the Mount, or the Christian idea of revealed law, with the Beatitudes. Jesus Christ in the Sermon on the Mount, revealing the Christian idea of law. The Beatitudes give positive statements of what shall be done balancing the Decalogue statements of what shall not be done.
The opening panel, and Violet Oakley talks about how a great illuminated manuscript of the past would open with a magnificent decorated letter. So you walk into this room, and over the doorway is the biggest letter L we've ever seen since Sesame Street. And
Yes.
it's L-A-W, law. The letters intertwined. It's on a globe. And what's so dynamic about the image is the interaction of these declarative letters. Let's talk a little bit about who is that amazing figure, the gigantic face, whose hair is swirling around the world and through this assembling of the idea of law as love and wisdom. Who is that figure?
Well, an art historian might say she resembles Botticelli's Venus with her blonde swirling locks, if we look at her that way. And then she's wisdom, but I think for Violet Oakley, she's a form of the eternal feminine, a spirit, female spirit of the world, which is maternal in this spiritual sense. Not so much domestic, but a kind of a world guiding spirit right out of the Old Testament, where wisdom is described also in female terms. And I think that's part of her feminist identification with social progress.
This is a room where you have to meditate on the images and the words together. And she loves the lettering, and she loves the words, and she loves the beauty of the font that she's invented. And I love to read, thou hast magnified thy word above all thy name. She has a drive that's coming from a very high sense of belief in her purpose on this planet. Violet Oakley is one of the artists we care about most at Woodmere. Her work is steeped in civic vision and a vision of the world as a better place. Violet's life partner, Edith Emerson, was the director of Woodmere for almost 40 years. And when I walk around our galleries, I feel the impact of Oakley, and I have to imagine that she supported Edith in her efforts to shape Woodmere as a museum dedicated to the artists of our own city. One of the messages that I hope our visitors can find throughout the exhibition is Violet Oakley's belief that this idea of world peace, an international concept of cooperation of nations to which she was dedicated, starts with people understanding each other in their own community.